We are live. Okay, excellent. So hey everybody out there. This is Liz from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here with Maurice Suckling, who is I would say, prolific game designer at this point. You make a lot of games, man. You got a lot of games coming out. We're here to talk about one in particular. So why don't you introduce your newest child to us?
Hi everyone. If I can show this,
Looks
this
good.
is the. It's not the final copy, but it's the prototype version that Salt and Pepper sent to me a few weeks ago, which has been great, really helpful for final playtesting and spotting stuff that it's harder to spot when you're still working off of older prototypes and you've got stickers on top of stickers on top of stickers that are partly falling off and you can only half read some of the stuff. So anyway, it's been great to see something more final and helped, I think, push things up in terms of the final quality of the end product. Hopefully that's the idea.
I think that'll be true. Yeah, one thing I've really been consistently impressed with when it comes to Salt and Pepper is that all of the prototypes look really, really good. Like whenever I preview one of their games, it looks like finished. It looks like a complete game, and there's something very nice about that. It makes me also feel more confident. I mean, obviously, we should feel confident, but it makes me feel like yes, this game is going to come out. We've got it under control. I always just feel a lot better when I see a nice prototype that's like ready because it means that the
Yeah,
development's already happened.
they just run it a different. I mean, I'm not sure how much of this is for me to be speaking about really, but they sort of run it a different way really, in that by the time they launch, they are already essentially in the production pipeline. Like essentially that's already going through. They're not waiting to see if they get the funds to kind of pull the thing together or not. So it means that it gives them a few advantages. One is that they're giving nicer prototypes to reviewers, but also people who maybe are not going to publicly review it, but they're just going to maybe give some feedback that's going to come back to the design team ahead of launch, so that that's stuff that you can use. So it has that advantage, and yes, it also means that the wait time for people after backing something is shorter than it would be otherwise. So two big wins really.
Nice. So, what is this game about? How's it played? How many people is it for? Give us the whole story.
Alrighty. So the whole story is that so Gonzalo at Salt and Pepper played my Chancellorsville 1863 game, and he liked that a lot. And he asked me, "Oh, hey, just people appearing in the chat." So, and he asked me if I'd like to make a game about Montgomery, General Montgomery, for him. And this has never really happened before, that a publisher had said, "Would you like to make a game?" I mean, I kind of have this arrangement with Worthington that essentially anything I make now, they will always be interested in saying, "Can we see it?" Which is nice. But this was a situation where I didn't know Gonzalo. I knew Salt and Pepper a little bit, but essentially it was a commission, right? So it was tremendously flattering, and I said yes because I was so flattered. But then I started to think, what am I actually going to do? Because as you most certainly know, Liz, tactical and operational level World War II games, there's a high bar, right? If you're going to make something in that space that, a lot of the players in that area, extremely well read. Like they're up on this stuff, right? So I thought, oh well, yeah, I guess it'll probably take me a couple of years to kind of get into a space where I can make something on Montgomery that I think might be worth making. Bearing in mind, you're really talking about El Alamein, you're talking about Arnhem, maybe D-Day stuff. There's a lot of reading to do, right? To kind of move in that space with confidence and competence as a designer. So obviously I started to think that's a problem, because I don't really have 2 years to just devote to this project. Anyway, I started to read more about Montgomery, and was starting to, the adrenaline starting to kick in, and you start to panic about what I haven't really got any idea for this, and discovered that he was attached to the British 12th Army at one point in discussions in 1943. What's interesting about the British 12th Army is that they did not exist. So they were a fictional order of battle that was created by this guy Dudley Clark, who was a spy in Cairo, quite a senior spy, and he created this entity to flummox the Abwehr. The Abwehr is the German military intelligence agency, and you can imagine this is actually tremendously powerful because the Germans think there's this whole army out there in the Mediterranean, and they can't figure out where it's going to land and where it's going to be, and actually it doesn't exist, right? But so anyway, it actually started to seem really interesting to me, and I was already aware of Operation Mincemeat, which some of you know from the 2021 movie with Colin Firth, I suspect, and it was a Ben McIntyre book about 10 years prior to that. And so Operation Barclay is the name for the umbrella term for the Mediterranean military intelligence war that happened in 1943. And Operation Mincemeat was a subset of that. I can tell a bit more about Operation Mincemeat in a moment. But essentially what happens is you get to the end of 1942 and the Allies are on the cusp of ejecting the Axis powers from North Africa. And the question is, well, where are they going to go next? So in January, the Casablanca conference, Roosevelt and Churchill meet and they discuss where are they going to go. Well, we know from history that we have Operation Husky in early July, right? They go to Sicily. But it wasn't necessarily obvious that that's what they would do. In the Operation Mincemeat movie, they give the Churchill character, a line there where any fool with a bloody map can see it's going to be Sicily. Sicily was an important step on the road to taking Italy because of the air bases. So yes, there's a certain logic there that it should be Sicily. On the other hand, there were some viable alternatives, or some potentially viable alternatives, including southern France, including Corsica and Sardinia, the Dodecanese and the Peloponnese, parts of the Eastern Med. And so what happens in sort of January, February 1943 is that Allies figure out, well, we've got to do some stuff to make sure that the Abwehr, the German military intelligence, they don't understand where they're going. They don't know. So we have to try and feed them disinformation. We have to confuse them. We have to make them think, hey, we're not going to Sicily, we're going somewhere else. Operation Mincemeat was a significant part of that, where the Allies floated a dead body off of the coast of Spain. It dressed as a British officer. It was a British man who actually was a homeless man, and they took his body. It turns out it's actually kind of hard to legally get hold of a body, even in World War II. Owen Glendow is his real name. And they dressed him up as a captain, a major, in fact, and they put documents in his pockets showing that the Allies were going to invade through the Balkans. And they float him out of a submarine. They kind of float his dead body and hope that the Spanish fisherman or someone picks him up and takes him to Spanish official channels, who will then, with sympathies to the Germans, will make sure that that information gets all the way to where it needs to go to, so that the Germans will think, aha, we found the solution. In fact, they're not going to Sicily, they're going to go to the Balkans, or at least a major offensive is going to come through the Balkans. And it worked. So Ian Fleming was involved in this concoction of a plan. Ian Fleming, the author of James Bond. And he was one of the people who contributed some ideas to this kind of Trout memo. It was called a kind of a list of crazy ideas that they were going to come up with, and it works. There's a little bit more to it than that. It wasn't immediately clear that the Spanish were going to pass the body and the documents on to the Germans, but they managed to ensure that happened, and they got the documentation back, which was all sealed as if it hadn't been looked at. But then they, kind of like eyelash on an envelope deal, they kind of realized that it had been crinkled, that in fact this was an eyelash that was missing. So they figured out the Germans have seen it. They don't want us to know that they've seen it. And they basically swallowed the bait. They think that the Balkans are significant in a way in which they really weren't. And the 12th Army is probably going to be a part of that. So I thought, that sounds super cool. That sounds super interesting. That's something that maybe we can make a game about that. There was a movie in the 50s called The Man Who Never Was. It was based on a book of the same title, which was essentially Operation Mincemeat, but it was kind of shielded a little bit with official secrets, and it was portrayed as a sort of crazy one-off, bizarre plan, whereas really lots of what the LCS, the London Controlling Section, were doing in World War II was this kind of stuff. They were doing this kind of stuff all the time. They existed in order to concoct these ridiculous plans and to confuse the enemy. And it made me think that not only is this an interesting idea for a game, but we probably neglected these sorts of topics in board wargaming, in historical board wargaming, more than we should, given how significant a part these kinds of operations play in warfare. They're not just, they're more significant than I think we give them credit for. And so that's what happened. I decided, I'm going to make a game about that. And so I did, and then I did it, and then it was done.
Easy. Everyone just go do it, and then you'll have done it, and then it'll be done.
So, one of the problems was, hi Alexandra. One of the problems was I didn't really know how to do it, right? Like, I had this idea that I thought was cool, and I thought might connect. I did, I did make Driver, a long time ago. In fact, it wasn't even called a PlayStation 1 in those days, was it? It was just a PlayStation. They hadn't invented the numbers that go on the end of it. So yeah, that was my first published game. So yeah, I couldn't figure out how to do it. Like, there weren't a lot of places to go to where I could say, oh well, what did Mark Herman do, or what did Volko Wonka do? Like there weren't a lot of places to go. John Prados actually made a game on Operation Bodyguard, connected to D-Day, but it sort of blends intelligence war with military operations. And I decided I'm not going to complicate my life and make it a game that blends military maneuver and operations as well. Otherwise, I'm back to kind of a 2-year development to sort of lead time again. I wanted to just kind of laser focus on the intelligence aspect. So I knew that I didn't want there to be armies that we even moved. It was just about, can you get the information that you need? And this, like I said, this was a headache. Like, I didn't really know how to do it. And then I figured out that I could just be more abstract about it all. I essentially realized that the essence of this operation was about, like I said, disinformation, right? So I needed something that could operate at the level of a metaphor that could be about disinformation. And I figured out the approach I was going to take was essentially, at the heart of it would be a trick-taking game. But it wasn't that important getting the best hand. What was more important was betting on who you thought was going to have the best hand. And so you'd be playing cards to try and entice people into thinking, oh, this person's going to have a good hand, or this person's going to have a bad hand. You play three cards face up so that everyone could see what everyone else was doing. Then you'd bet, and you'd say, I think they're going to have the better hand. And that's going to give you more chances to kind of get the information that you need. And then you're going to play 2 cards face down, so you can kind of actually be masking what you're really doing all along. And so that was the breakthrough for me when I realized, I can be, let's just embrace the fact that these games are abstractions. And
hey, 1 second. I locked my boyfriend out of our apartment. I'll be right back. Keep going.
Who else did I see was here? Alexandra was here. So that was the main thing that I did, was I decided to operate at the level of metaphor. And there's really sort of 2 games here. One is a trick-taking game and kind of betting on that. And the other thing is what you do with that information.
I'm going to pay for that one later.
So I was just saying, so I was saying that there are 2 parts to the game, really. The sort of trick-taking bit, which is, like I said, it's kind of like poker, but not quite identical to poker because the probabilities are different and there's other things going on. And actually, one of the other sources was one of the games that in the early 2000s got me back into, yes, two players, only 2 players. There's no bot or anything. One of the games that got me back into board gaming, card game, was Rainer Knizia's Battle Line, which has these 2 decks of cards. It's a trick-taking game. There's the regular deck of cards with, I think, 6 suits, 1 to 10, and this other deck of tactics cards, which modifies those cards in all sorts of ways. It extends the hands, the number of cards in a hand that you need, or it kind of gives you wild cards, and it does all sorts of interesting, funky stuff. I don't think the Battle Line is a historical simulation game by any means, but it's a fun game and a skillful design. And I lent into some of that as I was thinking about how to make this game work. So there's one central deck, intelligence channels, which is suits, 5 suits, 1 to 12, but 1 can also be a 13. And then these 2 separate decks that just for the LCS, the London Controlling Section, and 1 for the Abwehr, the German military intelligence. And these modify that central deck, allow you to do some more interesting stuff, but also are a way for me to, in a way, you could kind of think of it a bit like an event deck, put that sort of information in, put this sort of historical flavor into it to help it feel like I was addressing the history a bit more directly, given how abstract a lot of this is. So there are cards there on Ian Fleming is a card, right? And Operation Mincemeat is a card. And Joan Saunders, who was part of that Operation Mincemeat team, she's also a card. And William Canaris, who was head of the Abwehr, is a card, and so on. So there's 13 to 16 cards in those decks each that help support the kind of narrative that I'm attempting to address. And then, yeah, so trick taking and then betting on that stuff. And then essentially, you could think of it a little bit like a game like Watergate, right? Where you do some stuff and then you win some stuff, some tokens, and you can do something with them. In this game, the LCS don't do anything with the tokens. They are essentially preventing the Abwehr from doing something with them. So that's when the board comes in. So I should explain the board. So the board has 5 sectors, each corresponding to one of the potential invasion routes, or at least somewhat viable potential invasion routes. As we know, Sicily really was the one that they went for. But so in each of these sectors, there are 5 spaces, and you're going to put a series of tiles face down. And the Abwehr are attempting to flip enough of those tiles face up to understand where is the primary and where is the secondary invasion route going to be. That's really what it's all about. And so depending on who has the best hand, you're going to get some tokens. Abwehr is going to win some tokens. They get more tokens if they can bet correctly on who's going to have the best hand, and that's not a tie. And they also get another token for having the most reconnaissance or raid tokens on their cards. And so the Abwehr is going through this 6 turns, 6 game months. Each turn is a month in the game terms. And they're going to attempt to flip enough tiles in each of those turns to be able to figure out the answer, to see where's the invasion happening. And if they manage that, they win. And if they don't manage that, the LCS, the allies, they win. So it's a short game. I'd say, a lot of the time you see time on games. This game says 30 minutes on the box. And I actually think that's right. Like, I know that seems unlikely because we know how numbers and time work on games, but I certainly think after your first learn, and it's not a particularly complicated game, I do think you can be cracking it in about 30 minutes. I guess it depends who you're playing with and how much they like to pontificate. But that's the idea. It's kind of a fast play, quick setup, quick into it. But it shouldn't, if you're not really getting the best hand, that won't mean that you necessarily lose, right? It's more about figuring out who you think is going to have the best hand. So that's my sort of light, if you like, certainly a low cognitive load. I think it's a way of attempting to simulate the core essence of that intelligence war, which is about, let me make you believe something that might or might not be true, and now you're not sure whether, because you know I'm bluffing you at least in somewhere along the line, but you're just not sure, are you bluffing me here or are you bluffing me there? And I'm gonna have to take a guess that I think you're going for high cards, and I think that you think you're going to win this, so therefore I think I'm going to bet on you. But then maybe that's not true, and so you lose your chance to win tokens. So that's the essence of the game, and that's the background of how it came about.
Nice. So Mike wants to know, did a Monty card make it in there?
He did, yeah. So there's a card about leaking. So they also leaked the whereabouts of Montgomery. They did the same for Patton. There's a Patton card in there too, General Patton. So, and they work a bit like wild cards, right? That they give you a number, but they also can operate in any suit. But this information was information that, the Allies wanted to reveal. But the question was, did the Abwehr know that that's clearly was a plant, that they released that information? So they think, oh well, Monty's in Cairo, so maybe the invasion route's going to come through that axis, and they're going to attack through the Balkans. Well, but Patton's appearance has been leaked in Morocco, so maybe that tells you that they're coming through southern France. That's the basic idea.
Yes. And then, of course, we have the lovely, if there were 3 money cards. Oh, no. So we have, oh boy, this game would stress me out a ton. Double think is my worst enemy. What have you seen in playtests? Are people, I feel like the game ends so quickly. A little tension won't hurt anyone.
It's fast, right? So I think it would be more difficult an experience if it was much longer. It would be just a different kind of design. And let me say, this approach that I've taken with this topic, this is just one way to do it, right? I'm not suggesting that this is the only way to tackle the intelligence war in general, or the intelligence war in the Mediterranean. There are lots of other ways to do this. I think we've barely scratched the surface on how to even do this. I just came at it this particular way. But what I've seen is that first time, people overthink it a lot, right? They definitely are hesitant to play. I had a playthrough today. It took about an hour and a half, maybe, with teaching it. That surprised me, even though I guess I've seen it a few times. But I think people just overthink it a lot. They're sort of cautious about what information am I revealing here, and is this too much? But I think that's just sort of I think that's people playing prototypes and maybe playing with me, and when people play with a designer, that's also, I mean, you don't have any other choice, right, as the designer, but you'd be more interested in seeing other people play it blind. If you could have one of those police mirrors that lets you see what's going on, that would be far more interesting, right? Because then you actually get blind playtesting, and you'd figure out if the rules even make sense and that sort of stuff. So I have seen that. I've seen people overthink it, but I haven't really seen people get super stressed by it. It's like I say, short. Also, there's the artwork for it plays to a certain sort of tone of voice that keeps it kind of lighter, on the lighter side of a kind of tonal palette. It's sort of, I think to me the artwork is sort of redolent a little bit of Hergé's work. It has this sort of naturalistic quality, but it's still got it's still a kind of a cartoon world, and I think that's about right. I think that kind of fits the tone for this well. And also, I think it sort of reifies the people involved. It helps the people not just be ciphers for the mechanics, right? To actually see pictures. I know you've been reading Helen Fry's Women in Intelligence, and that's also one of the books that I've used. And there's an Agent Bronx was her name, and through Helen Fry's book, I found her,
Yeah.
and she's this double agent and super interesting, you know, and as far as I know, that's the first time she's ever been turned into a cartoony type illustration image. Cartoon kind of probably sounds like the wrong word to say, but it's, like I said, has this naturalistic quality to it.
Yeah, Alex, I'm gonna come back to you, but just since we're on art,
Yeah.
I agree that the artwork is lovely. Salt and Pepper's really been like knocking it out of the park on the art. How much of a say did you have in the art generation process, and like what was it like? And I'm just sort of curious about the
Yeah.
kind of interaction between designer and illustrator.
So it was great, and I enjoyed working with them very much. Uh, the way it worked was Gonzalo put a couple of different artists' work in front of me, saying that these were the two he was looking at. And did I have any opinions? And I think we both had the same opinion, that there was a particular kind of look that we were getting from one of the potential candidates that had this naturalistic quality. So I think we both decided that was how we wanted to go. And from there, it was largely plain sailing. Like most of the time, I would say, here's the card, here's the kind of image that I think we might need. So I don't know, like the Ultra card, right? When the Allies break the Enigma code, there's a card on that. So I suggested, well, maybe we'll do Bletchley Park. I mean, yes, there's other images we could have gone with, but I went with that. You know, I think if we were short of portraits, might have approached that differently. But it just felt like a good decision to kind of break it up a bit. So I would mostly sort of say, I think this is the image that we want, and mostly it was just me just seeing this stuff come through and go, wow, that looks great, that looks amazing. And I'm just really thankful that we had these artists on the project. And there were some other discussions to do with icons and like how to remove some text with icons, and approaches to that. The layout, they essentially completely reworked the very basic prototype that I had to kind of just put stuff on the card in better places that made more sense of the space. And I largely, I don't think I had really anything to do with that. They just took care of that. How many unique card illustrations? Actually, not that many. So if you think there's 5, so it's basically 60 cards in one deck and 13 in each of the others. Each of those 13, the 13 cards from the LCS and 13 from the Abwehr, almost all of those are unique. They're different people or different concepts most of the time. There's 1 or 2 duplicates. But in that big deck of 60, lots of those images were the same, but with like different treatments, like different color treatments. So if you think about, if you have an image for a spy, that would be one image, but then the location would be different and the suit would be different, and perhaps the number would be different too. So that's an image that we could use many times over. This wasn't pressure coming from the publisher to say, hey, I just need you to find the cheapest way to do this. In fact, when I said to Gonzalo, I don't need that many, lots of these we can reuse, they don't really make sense. I think it'd be more confusing for the player if every image is different, when essentially the card is the same but just in a different suit. Again, think about how Battle Line does that. There's no need for those images to be different other than just different colors, right? So I think he was surprised when I said we didn't need that many. There's probably 10, 12 different unique images in that big deck.
Nice.
I saw a question there about Albert. So Albert Montes wasn't the artist in this case. The Meeple Foundry have worked with Salt and Pepper on various projects. I don't want to say which ones now in case I get them mixed up, but they've worked sometimes as artists, sometimes as graphic designers. So sometimes artists as in illustrators, sometimes as graphic designers, and sometimes as both. And yes, I also thought that there was a sort of stylistic similarity there, the sort of similar kind of approach in this particular on this particular project. But I think Meeple Foundry do all sorts of different kinds of stuff, and I think that my understanding is that they actually kind of like moving around different styles, and don't really like to be set doing the same thing over and over. And it just so happened that the style that we were looking for, that Gonzalo and I were looking for, was just the thing that they wanted to be working on around the time that the project came to them. So it was sort of a lucky happenstance, worked out that way.
Perfect. All right, so now I want to get back to Alex's comment from earlier because I thought it was cool. So he says, I like the idea of calling less simulationist games metaphors. It's a nice way of describing abstraction in a game. Is this the first time you've made a game that you think you would describe as metaphorical?
No, I think not. But I think it's the most. I think it's the game where that's the most suitable term to use. I think that Crisis, which Alexander played last year, I think it was, also operates at the level of a metaphor, in that this is Crisis 1914, you're asking players to engage with brinkmanship, to push their score up until they push it too far, and then they realize they've over-egged the pudding, and it's going to bite them. So I would say that operates at the level of metaphor too, and you could probably say that maybe really all games are doing that, at least all games that are engaging with mechanics the right way. The mechanics ought to operate as a metaphor, right? It's just that this was the game where, until I really fixed on a whole metaphorical approach that was so abstracted, I didn't know how to proceed with it, because otherwise, I think lots of game design is turning concepts into numbers, right? It's turning qualities into quantities, and that's tough in a topic like this. As it turns out, you can see I still did that, because this information I turned into numbers of tiles, and I defined a victory threshold as being a certain number of tiles in a certain number of regions equals victory. So I still did it, but lots of this information is still not even available. So there's a reason why lots of the spies, I don't have their names, because they were good spies, a lot of them. I don't know who they were. We don't have that information, and I just couldn't see another way to do it. But I think in general, I'm not sure you can ever really get away from metaphor, or that you would want to.
No, I think the contrast of metaphor with less simulation is interesting, because I feel like there's always so many arguments about, okay, is this a simulation or not? Which honestly is a question I like even less well than, is it a war game?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that whole question is yeah, I think I prefer that less as well, that question, because I think it's on such shaky ground, because there's this an understanding or a misunderstanding that simulation equals more accurate, equals more complex. And I think that this is hard to support necessarily. In fact, even if you look in the professional space, that isn't really how people are talking about what a simulation is. A simulation is trying to drive at how people feel about something, and complexity and level of detail is not necessarily the best, to use a synonym, the best representation of a situation. Certainly not necessarily how it feels to those engaged in it.
Yeah.
So, this is something I've spoken a little bit to you about before. And in fact, I just wrote a chapter on this. I've written a book that will come out hopefully later this year. But I've been pushing for a way of thinking about this, which is abstraction, simulation through abstraction, right? Simulation by virtue of abstraction. So we're simulating something not through the vast amount of complex data that exists, and not through vast complexities, but we're approaching it through the essence of how it feels, and how it feels to those engaged. And if we can tap into that, we're hitting on something that's more important than vast amounts of data. If I give you an example of, if we look at I don't know, any war game with a very detailed order of battle, and we take that argument that therefore, because this order of battle is so highly detailed, that is a more accurate game, that's a difficult argument to sustain, and not one that I can support, particularly if we've got one game, let's say it's, I don't know, American Civil War game, and there's a detailed order of battle, and all the information is revealed. There's no hidden movement or anything. And we've got another game that has no complex, detailed order of battle, but buys deep into hidden movement and command control communication issues. I'm going to say, well, that one that doesn't have the complex order of battle is a better, there's more fidelity in that depiction of that history and how it felt to those engaged, than having all this information and having all this perfect information and having this detailed order of battle. And I think that's kind of the crux of really where I come in with that argument, that more data and doesn't mean more accurate in a way that matters to depending on what it is you're trying to do as a designer. But sometimes it's better to be less accurate in order to convey a feeling that's far more pertinent to your design agenda.
Nice. So Bill's trying to tweet me here. Like coding, it's all probability, conditions, and randomness. Liz hates to hear this, but it's all math. Is that just like saying a book is just letters? Like, it's what the math does and how it makes you feel that makes it something more than math. Like,
yeah, I mean, right. It's games are, if they're math, it's math with emotion that's leveraged in a certain way, and without that, and without knowing how to control your audience and how to set situations up in such a way that it feels what it is that you want people to be feeling, or something in that ballpark, then I guess it is just numbers and letters at that point.
yeah, I don't know. Something about what you just made me think about. There are architects who are experts at making you feel like a certain entrance of a building is the one that you should go into, or that, like, like even just like the placement, the arrangement, openness, like, light, all those things, they come together to like direct human behavior. And I feel like with games, what you're doing is you're offering an array of options, but there's something more to it where you're kind of directing a human experience in some way.
I mean, yeah, it's all rhetoric, whether you are fully aware of how you're leveraging it or not. You're cultivating an experience, and that experience is the key. To me, that's the key thing. What kind of experience do you want your players to feel?
Yeah, My pre-calc teacher did not give me an experience. Let's put it that way. Well, it was an experience, but it wasn't good. So, Rocky wants to know, at first blush, Freeman's Farm might look like a simulation, but I think the point is to get into the game and not map out all possibilities. Am I close?
Yes, yeah, it's more, again, that's a game that I think of as being a short game, and trying to, I wanted to convey how command control communication is just problematic. That, you know, no commander in, very few commanders in history have got to look at situations top down and say, oh, I can see where everyone is and what their strength points are. And at that point, I don't know, if you're designing something that has that perfect information, sure, you know, people want to play that, and there's a whole convention that's very immensely popular, but that doesn't really do it for me. It doesn't do something very interesting. I wanted to figure out, how do I take a battle that's essentially static? There's some attempt to outflank, which goes wrong. The British attempt to outflank, and it goes wrong. And essentially, we've got two lines that are fighting each other. How do I do that in an interesting way? Yeah, before I made that game, I played every game on that subject that existed bar one, because I was doing a study on it. I wanted to just be able to understand. I wanted to write a paper on it. And in the process of playing all these games, lots of them I thought were just not that interesting, or they didn't make me feel like one of the historical actors. They didn't jibe with anything that I was reading, where the British don't really know exactly how many troops are where, and the Americans don't really know exactly. I mean, there's that meme, right? We see it on Facebook groups where there's two Prussian generals, or maybe they're early Imperial German generals, and they're looking over a map, and one is saying, if I could just get 2 more strength factors, I can get 4-1 odds here. Something like that, right? And that's kind of the problem. If you don't try and come at it another way, and show that it's hard to make things happen on the battlefield, and you don't have complete control over everything, then you're going to be kind of pushed into that kind of experience. And I didn't want to make that kind of experience. I wanted to make something that showed that you've got some stuff that you want to do. You make a few big decisions. The game only lasts, whatever it is, 15 turns. And, you know, stuff comes off or it doesn't come off. You win, you lose, you set it up again, and you have another go, and you try and do better, and kind of reading the odds, or looking at opportunities to make something happen. And in fact, that's probably another example of a metaphor, where I remember reading about the battle, and it feeling like there were these windows of opportunity that kind of passed the commanders to do something. And so the tableau of tactics cards that you can buy kind of operate like that. They sort of move off. If you don't buy them in time, they disappear. You have this period of time where you think, oh, that's the thing that I want, and I can buy it now, and maybe I'll use it later, but that's an opportunity that I'm going to seize on. And I suppose that's a metaphor for windows of opportunity that open and close, and maybe you don't have the momentum cubes you need at the time to purchase them, in which case it's closed. You just didn't get that shot at it. And so those tactics cards ended up being a really fundamental part of that design that made it more interesting and more challenging to play, a more fluid system, sort of harder to navigate, harder and more fun as a result of that difficulty.
Nice. All right, we got the classic question that always happens on a channel like mine. Any chance for solitaire rules?
I mean, there's no plan. There's no plan. There's been no discussion. I haven't even really sat down to think about what it would involve to make it work, and it's not straightforward. So when you set the board up, the Abwehr player has to turn away look at their phone, do something else, while the LCS player puts tokens on the board and flips them over in a certain order, a certain way of doing that. Each game, the sector can be different. The sectors that you're looking for can be different. But they have to be done. It has to be as a specific way of the game being set up. So I'm not sure that it would work. And at a 30-minute game, it feels like just an experience that I think is more fun as a two-player. I think that remember, I was really saying that tension of misdirecting or thinking that you're being misdirected and trying to read that's really hard without a human actor to kind of bounce off of and get that sensation. And at that point, I sort of feel like, play another one-player game, and that'll be a better use of your time. I think save this for playing it with others. I mean, yeah, because it's a small game and a short game, I think it's just a better use of resources and also just my own time. I feel like in the time it would take me to make a solo player that I think could work or be worth playing, given what I've just said about how I don't even think it could really operate, I could make other stuff, and probably that's what I would do. So
yeah, no, I mean, I do agree. Maybe not all games should do all things. I know that the temptation, like, I love to play games solo. I really only buy solo games, but that's just for lack of opportunity. Maybe things will change for me, but but I also think that just because that's my preferred mode, like, that doesn't mean that you have to make a solo for all of us.
yeah,
However,
I mean,
I was gonna say, if you want a solo trick taker, For Northwood is the one, and it just came back in a print.
Mhm.
So
I actually normally do have solo games in my designs because I really like testing them that way. They're a really good development tool. But this turns out to be an exception where they just haven't ever thought about it, and it never conceived of it that way. And I suspect that just won't. I just suspect it won't happen. I mean, when tens of thousands of people are begging for one, perhaps, I don't know. Perhaps I'll speed dial Joe Dewhurst and get him to do something.
So you said that you often like to test things solo. How did it impact your testing to do a non-solo design?
Um, it just meant that I had to play it in my head a lot in the very early stages, and then I had a student who was doing an independent study with me, and we played it a lot. So it's with him, we were probably, I think we were down to about 15 minutes. We would play it fast.
That's
And
the
we just played it
craziest
a lot.
independent study I ever heard of. That sounds awesome.
I did quite a few of those. So actually, that same student, Eric Ridz, he also did a lot of playtesting on Crisis 1914. So yeah, I tend to do that a lot, and it's invaluable, as you know. There's no way I tested Crisis 1914. I did, yeah, I did, and in fact, I could play that in about 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes when it was later on, and I kind of knew what I was doing. But yeah, in fact, I also, with that one, I actually had two students. One was just doing solo for a whole semester. He just played that. And each week I'd give him updates to the cards, and he would be testing it again. He played it a lot. And then, yeah, I also tested it solo.
All right, so we got about 10 minutes left of our time. So just to kind of like make sure we get stuff in. So obviously we're gonna come back to Operation Barclay, but what's your general agenda of upcoming games? And then let's get back to the game in question, and you can talk to us about when the campaign is starting and when we can look for it.
So what was the first question? General agenda about games?
Agenda, like what games do you have that are currently coming into the world from where? I feel like there's a lot.
You said I was prolific. You know this, right? You know that every time you say the word prolific, David Thompson makes another game.
Yeah, but he makes it with me now, so that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's perfectly good. Perfectly good. So So this one is so well. Crisis, I think, is shipping. Some people told me it's shipping. I haven't seen any notification of that. I don't know, but I'm hoping it's going to be with people imminently. So I don't know. I don't know if that's next week or the week after, but I'm hoping it's soon. So there's that. Then so Operation Barclay launches on GameFound on June 7th. Oh, Mike got his shipping notice from Worthington. Okay, that's good. I was confused because someone told me about it, but it was saying it was shipping in February. So I don't know what happened. So yes, so this is June 7th. Then, so I have some other things
for my
in
birthday.
development.
I guess I know what I'm getting myself.
I'm making Rebellion Britannia with Daniel Burt. That's now the sort of the GMT's eyes have kind of turned to that, and that's getting a bit more attention. I think that's going to get some more love and development there, which I'm excited about. That's been so 2020 was that first Consim game jam. That's it was part of that cohort of games.
Yeah, is it the one that where you got banned?
No, it was the second one. So
oh.
so that game. So Peace 1905, which I'm making with Nathaniel Barclay, SP Shaman, and Bill Sullivan, that won the Consim Game Jam 2 years ago, year and a half ago, can't remember. And I got banned for that one. So because Britannia didn't win, it came second. And then so I didn't really understand when Fred set these up. I didn't think that it was. I kind of thought, look, I want to do this stuff. I want to do game jams with my students. I really shouldn't be setting this as a task unless I've done it myself. And I actually had never done a game jam for whatever reason. I guess, in video games, I'm a writer, so kind of game jam is going to be horrendous. In video games, and I thought a board game jam sounds great. Let me try it. Let me see what it's about. And I enjoyed it and got this work out of it and thought, that's kind of interesting. And I was sort of having this idea that maybe that the time span of the competition actually generates or encourages a certain type of design. And I thought anyway, let me do this other one. And I nearly didn't do the second one because there was no one that I knew was taking part. And then I thought, well, let me just hear the brief. And then I heard the brief, and then I thought, oh man, I'm going to let these people down now. So I didn't want to do that. So made this game. So that's with Fort Circle, which I think it will come out next year. I think that I think Kevin's plan is to put it on Kickstarter later this summer, end of the summer or the fall or something. So there's that, and that's all that's imminent, really. There's some other things. Jason Matthews and I are talking about doing a game later this summer. We'll start work on that, and I'm working with Matthias Kramer on a design. And then there are a couple of other things that have been around for a while, but I'm only just this summer getting to prototype them. So one is a game on the fall of Camelot. It's not a history game in this case. It's about Camelot and about sort of asymmetric design as the Mordred tries to defeat Arthur, but with Merlin and Morgana mixed in there too. And another one on Elizabethan spycraft. So Elizabeth I, but with spies and different factions. So French and Spanish and English agents all trying to win. And you're not quite sure who's who is the idea. Kind of hidden traitor mechanic.
That sounds really good. So as we wind down, of course, Russ wants to let us know that ban sounds like canceled. Just saying.
Yeah,
of course, Fred overstepping his cancellation rights, which of course lie with me. So we should unban you.
Yeah, it needs a higher power to intervene.
Excellent. But does anybody have any final questions about Operation Barclay before we go? Just some dissing a friend in the comments. A perfect end to a lovely stream. But all right, everybody out there, this is Maurice Suckling. You should go check out on June 7th on GameFound, Operation Barclay, which is going to be published by Salt and Pepper. It looks good. It sounds really good. I might be tempted to get a 2-player game. So excellent. Good luck, Maurice. And I'm sure we'll have you back on to talk about more awesome stuff in the future.
Thanks, Liz.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions. And most of all, happy gaming.